Welcome back, everybody. Hello, hello. Can I ask you please all to take your seats? So a little bit of an applause. How was your morning? Woo! Okay, we got some woots. I like the woots. Okay, so before we begin, I really hope that you've enjoyed your lunch, and I just want to thank Mike and his team from the Canadian Standards Association who helped us to provide that lunch to you, so thanks so much. See you safe. And in fact, I'm going to ask Michael to come up and say a few words and to introduce him. He is the Director of Environment and Business Excellence for the Canadian Standards Association, operating as CSA Group, and is currently Vice Chair of the Circular Innovation Council. With the responsibilities with the CSA include overseeing 3 primary programs, including environment and climate change, natural resources, and CSA group registries. Michael.
I really enjoy the entry music. It's probably my favorite part. But Joanne, thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity to introduce this next panel on the blueprint for transformation to a just, equitable, and sustainable circular economy. I wanted to start off by acknowledging that the land that we're on is the traditional unceded territory of the Mohawk Nation. The present day Montreal has long since served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, and I wanted to thank them for the opportunity to gather here to advance discussions, collaborations related to advancing circular economy. So as we collectively prepare to dive deeper into the blueprint for transformation, I wanted to use this introduction to reflect on what I believe is essential to drive meaningful progress and what is needed to really underpin an effective circular economy transformation. Standards will really play a critical role in systems level transformation required to be truly circular. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also start off by clarifying a few important points about the Canadian Standards Association and standards in general. First and foremost, the Canadian Standards Association is a not-for-profit, non-government membership-based association. We've been around for over 100 years, keeping Canadians safe and working towards making a world better, safer, and more sustainable. And I also wanted to clarify that people often think that CSA writes standards. And it's actually a lot more accurate to note that we don't write standards, but we actually facilitate the development of standards through the contributions of experts from diverse backgrounds. Our role as a national standards developer is to bring together experts to build consensus on the requirements that go into our standards. Consensus on things like defining the proper water temperature for safely sanitizing reusable containers, or consensus on the calculation points of recycling rates for the plastics value stream. We ensure that the requirements published in our standards meet the needs of industry and the marketplace. We facilitate public review of our draft standards before they're published, and we ensure that they're maintained over time so that they can keep pace with innovation and act as defensible backbones for policies and regulations everywhere. I really do believe that the consensus building process and bringing together a balanced representation of experts to set the standards is really that foundational piece across all the different sectors that we operate in to transition to circularity. Standards can really serve as anchors and the blueprint for the transition by creating clarity, consistency, and trust. At CSA, we've made circularity a strategic priority across all of the different areas that we operate in. We're investing significantly in foundational research and standards development, and I really did want to take a moment to share a few examples to start us thinking about this blueprint for transformation and some of the needed components like standards that will really ultimately get us there. Like, let's start with plastics. We completed some formal research that realized that there was a barrier to advancing plastic recycling and reuse was that there was an absence of a common national definition for plastics recycling. To agree on where and when in the value chain a piece of plastic was considered to be recycled, and building consensus on that piece was critical. This common definition really is the beginning of the blueprint and one cog in the wheel to move towards circular plastics. We're additionally supporting circularity related to reuse of food containers. We're working with Resolve, or PR3, from the US to develop a series of binational standards on reusable containers, setting standards for things like container design, washing, distribution, just to name a few. Again, underscoring that fundamental blueprint for reuse circularity. We also manage the Canadian Mirror Committee that is helping to support and participate at international standards development activities. We've recently then further actually adopted the international standards into Canada, making sure that they're relevant for the Canadian marketplace. We're also very much excited to be now working on further research on the implementation of things like ISO 59020 on measuring circularity, working with CELC, trying to understand how to apply these standards and align with other measuring circularity processes that are out there. Within our construction and infrastructure sector, we've also been supporting circularity and actually working very closely with Circular Economy Leadership Canada. We collaborated on 2 major research reports for the circular built environment, and we published a strategic framework for future action. It's this that laid the groundwork for the strategic direction of the new Circular Construction Innovation Hub, which is an initiative led by CELC. Most recently at CSA in the construction area, we have been forming a new technical committee on circular construction, and we've launched the development of a new national standard on terminology and definitions for the circular built environment. My colleague Dwayne Torrey will be speaking about this at 2 o'clock this afternoon. In our newest program area, agriculture and agri-food, we recently published research on regenerative agriculture, and we've identified critical needs for standards that need to provide clarity, structure, and transparency to support the broad uptake of regenerative practices. In the area of food loss and waste, we're advancing research and leading national and international standards development activities to set, again, common terminology and measurement methods with the intent of, again, underpinning this blueprint and transitioning to circularity. Within CSA's oil and gas sector, we're launching research on adaptive reuse of oil and gas infrastructure for new and emerging energy commodities, applications, and enablers. This work will investigate circular adaptive reuse in Canada's oil and gas sector, looking to identify ways of extracting things like, for example, critical minerals such as lithium and helium from the current oil and gas waste streams, trying again to create new ways of using old infrastructure. Lastly, in our transportation sector, we did conduct research in 2022 and published it on circularity and recycling of lithium-ion batteries. And we're now investing in the development of a new technical specification that addresses the full battery life cycle to provide best practices to industry. So together, all of these examples, in my humble view, really help to underscore the ways in which standards support the transformation and the systemic change that's really needed to move to circular solutions. While standards are also, importantly, only one part of the broader transformation, they offer a critical starting point, a backbone for potential policy and regulations, and without common definitions and terminology that everyone can embody, advancement in circularity may be limited. So at CSA, we're extremely proud to be supporting circularity across all of the sectors that we operate in, and we're excited to continue building further momentum and supporting other initiatives where and when standards can help play a role. So with that, let's turn our attention to the additional core principles needed to guide a just, equitable, and sustainable transition to circular economy. As we navigate this complex transformation to circularity, it really is crucial to bring together diverse perspectives and expertise, and I'm really excited to hear from the group of exceptional panelists who will share their insights and experiences today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Shorthouse, who's going to be moderating today's session from CELC.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully you all know me by now. And I'd like to welcome our panelists up to the stage as well at this time to help unpack this very lofty topic. And we've got some great perspectives. Alec? Great. Okay. So this is, like I mentioned, a lofty topic. We're going to dive into, the social aspects, the governance considerations, the policies and the alternatives to things like consumption-driven growth. So we have a lot to talk about here in about 55 minutes or so. I'm pinch hitting a little bit. Cynthia Reynolds from Circular Regions, who's joining us from Norway and actually a Canadian resident from Montreal, unfortunately has lost her voice. So I've come to join, and we'll be facilitating this conversation today. So just to my left, some of you might have seen Alec on one of the previous panels. He's the chairman at Rethink Sustainability Initiatives. We have Maya Colombani from L'Oréal Canada, who's the Chief Sustainability and Human Rights Officer. We have Danielle Taillant, who is the Executive Director of the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and Melissa Gorrie, who is with the Ecojustice. She's the Law Reform Manager and focusing her work on circular economy. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this. I think it's really helpful for us just to start setting the stage with unpacking the topic of transformation when we're talking about a transformation to and a blueprint for transformation to guiding a just, equitable, and sustainable circular economy. So if we could just bring up a couple slides here, I think it will just help to set the context a little bit around the difference between economic transition and economic transformation. So I'm going to try and do a good job of unpacking this a little bit. It actually comes from Cynthia's new book called Diamond Economics that she's going to be releasing in October. And you can check it out. I think it's diamondeconomics.org. So more information on that. But essentially, we're talking about going from vulnerable economic systems to more resilient economic systems. We're talking about a mindset from incremental improvements to regenerative mindset. From the exploitation of the commons, of our resources, et cetera, to the stewardship of the commons. From fragmented existing frameworks to holistic, integrated, systemic shifts. From reactive and addressing sort of specific issues as they come up on the fly to redefining values and goals. To short-term growth-based indicators to measuring more long-term values-based indicators. And from top-down governance structures to distributed governance. And lastly, inequality to social equity. So how do we think about this from also the vision and the view of marginalized communities and to empowering our communities to taking action on this and giving them the tools and the resources we need to succeed. So it's really, rather than people serving the economy, it's the economy serving the people. And in turn also protecting our environment and thinking more holistically about our systems. So, and just to say that this system has different leverage points. So there's the practical things like business models and aspects that we need to think about. There's the structural components to our economy, whether it's policies or governance structures, and the cultural piece, which we absolutely cannot forget about, the social aspect to all of this. So, keeping that in mind, I think, in terms of unpacking this discussion on transformation, I just would like to open up the dialogue and give everybody a chance to sort of reflect on a question about how do we ensure that circular economy efforts lead to true transformation rather than just this incremental transition. And so I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to think about that, and maybe I'll start with you, Alec.
Well, I think one of the the key pieces about that distinction between transition and transformation, first of all, is transition is simply change, and it can be reversed. Transformation is moving towards an outcome, to an end state.
Ouais.
And it's a fundamental systems shift. It's a full ecosystem shift. And so the stickiness of transformation is inherent in that process. It requires things that you raised, but it depends on an entirely evidenced understanding of your current situation so that you can see where you're going and what you are going to achieve in the future. If you use a historic set of data, it's based on assumptions. That data collection comes from a model that is based on assumptions that may no longer be valid. And so you need to create this new model. And if you can create the new model, you have new understanding and you can transform. Otherwise, it's just transition.
Love it.
Thank you.
I was thinking about this model, and thank you so much for sharing. To be very direct, if I talk about L'Oréal, I don't think we have touched the graal of radical transformation, but we are on our way. Why we are on our way? First point, there is no possibility to do business as we have done. We have reached a tipping point. It doesn't work anymore, and we have to change. But if you want to go from incremental change to true transformation, first, it should be embedded at the top. Sorry, I will get down after. But if it's not a radical vision of your business, it will not work. It will not be long-term. It will not be sustainable and resilient. So in the case of L'Oréal, it's really embedded at the CEO and president level with all the stakeholders behind. After that, if it stays at the top, it doesn't work because you need innovative and transformative force to adopt and to change your culture. So it should be adopted at the bottom. So for example, in our case, at the top, sustainability, it's a top 5 priority in L'Oréal Canada, as for example, customer or people. So we put business and traditional business turnover at the same level of our sustainability performance. And for example, my president received her bonus, the same level of bonus, if she reached her turnover or if she reached a sustainability target. So we are truly changing, even though the way to define what is success look like. But what she have done, she have created a new job. So for example, me, I am the new job, Chief Sustainability Officer, and I directly report to her. I'm not in the communication staff to sell more shampoo, saying it's more respectuous to nature. I am here to transform the full value chain. And what is the first step we have done? I have created a sustainability community that embed the best experts from all the value chain of my product, from supply, finance, human resources, all my division units, all legal, scientific affairs. And all these people are looking in the same direction in their expertise, and they apply what success look like in all the life cycle analysis. So if we want to do a deep transformation, we should embed the full value chain with clear target. What you don't measure doesn't exist. It's bullshit. No, it's really important. And also, you should change the culture and celebrate when it works, but it should be linked with the success story. And when you reach this level, you start the transformation. So for example, us, we have passed from, we're changing the core of our engine, which means the product, because it serves nothing to recycle a packaging if you didn't change the way you create your own product. Today, we have 65% of natural ingredients. Nine years ago, we had 30%. So we are defossilizing our own formula to go for renewable and natural ingredient. 9 years or 10 years ago, we were with 20% of PCR recycled plastic. Today, we have 85%. So we are changing the way we create products. We reduce the packaging. We imagine product without packaging. We create new category. So it's start from your core business, and it's not a parallel, small, cute project with data that you never disclose.
So moving from incremental really to rethink about starting with that ambitious vision or transformational radical vision.
Yeah.
Daniel?
Yes, thank you. And maybe I'll start with a story, a very short one. I had the fortune of living in rural Asia for a couple of years. And after about a year of being there, we cohabitated with a family, and I had lost something. And the family, the father of the family said, well, maybe it's in the trash. And I was very young back then. I hadn't even thought of where the trash was, right? Someone else took care of that. Well, it turns out it was a compost pile in the backyard. And when we went down to see if I could find what I had lost, I could see all of our trash for a year. None of that belonged to the Cambodian family that I lived with. It was all my trash. And we don't think about the management of our waste. And if you look at the title of this event, we've even forgotten what economy means. And it starts with the word eco, as ecology does, which means our home, the management of our home. And what we've done in the past 200 years is that we have lost the connection to our home, which is our ecosystem. And you can think of your home as the place you live, but you can also think of it as your planet. And transformation is about going back to the basics. It's about understanding that if all of the elements of our ecosystem, the living and the non-living, the human and the non-human, are living in harmony, are existing in harmony, we will all be better for that. And that is really why and why we're here today. It's not about a transition to net zero. It's not about getting the indicators right. It's about living in harmony with the elements of nature and the interrelationship of those elements. And this is where we need to go. And so as we think about the circular economy, as we think about the crisis that we're living, we need to understand that we are on a pathway of destruction. The model is broken. The system that we have built is not sustainable. And the problem is that the longer we take to fix it, the further away it will be for us to be able to repair it. And we're actually crossing some tipping points where it's no longer repairable. And so we need to move quickly.
Wow. Management of home. And that really reminds me of the opening keynote from Kevin Deere about our Mother Earth and the importance of respecting that. And I think that maybe is a great transition to the role of the legal systems. And Melissa, your thoughts?
Yeah, that is a really good transition in a conversation about transformation. And on the slides from Cynthia at the end, it said, an economy serving people, not a people serving the economy. And I think that's really key. And what does that mean? And I think you're talking about living in harmony and balance. We really need to live within the laws and limits of the natural world. We can't exist outside of them. We can't have an economy that disregards the laws and limits, and right now it does. We can't ignore the extractive, profit-driven, growth-driven reality that we live within and expect that we can just circularize our way out of it. The reality is it's creating a lot of inequity, a lot of harm, a lot of injustice. And we have to grapple with what it means to live in a society that is focused so much on growth and increasing profit, and often profit in the hands of large corporations. You're seeing the inequity grow. And so I think thinking about how we reorient our economy towards purposes that we actually care about and values that we care about, and ensuring the well-being of people and the planet in an equitable manner. And I think, and it talks about, at the beginning, at the first day, and the recognition of Mother Earth, I think one of the key pieces that's not talked about a lot is the fact that we are on Indigenous lands and what that really means. When the slide that talked about our commons, the commons is Indigenous land that, me, as I'll say, I'm a fourth generation European settler, and that's my perspective coming into this. But, we need to center Indigenous rights and sovereignty in Indigenous peoples and ensuring that we're designing an economy that respects those rights and is pluralistic, and looking at economies from that framing and supporting Indigenous-led solutions, respecting Indigenous knowledge, not co-opting it for the benefit of state-based or corporate business, saying, oh yeah, circularity, regeneration, that's all part of Indigenous knowledge systems and ways of being, but then leaving Indigenous people out of building, designing the economy, and then benefiting from the economy. And so I think the one final thing I'll say, because there's so much you could, but I think we have to be focusing on where are people in this model. I've seen a lot of really zazzy circular economy visuals out there, but how are people being included? How is their input and being included, and are we ensuring that they are benefiting through this process? There is so much inequity, and the folks that have been disproportionately harmed by the current linear economy, they need to be integral into designing solutions and ensuring that they are benefiting moving forward. And issues like environmental racism and environmental injustice need to be serious considerations. When we're designing these systems, are we thinking about how are we rectifying inequity, environmental injustice, and designing these systems in a way that are safe circularity, the health, and taking a precautionary basis when we're designing all of this stuff. We can't live in abstract realities and focus so much on tech fixes and engineering without thinking about the impacts on people and the earth at the same time, and being precautionary in how we're designing things.
Thank you. So I think, we've talked sort of at the big picture of what's needed here. I wonder if we can break it down a little bit by using that framework from the slide I shared earlier that comes from the Diamond Economics book, which had the seesaw, and it talked about practical interventions, structural interventions, and cultural interventions. And so if we think first about the practical interventions being focused on direct and immediate actions like new business models or optimized circular economy strategies and risk management, breaking that down a little bit, I think a lot about the risk. How do we move and how do we transform quickly? How do we manage the risk side? And Alec, I know you do a lot of work in the risk space and climate adaptation and other areas. How does risk profiling support businesses in transitioning from sort of vulnerability to more resilience?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing to bear in mind, and actually I think Buckminster Fuller put it most appropriately. He said that pollution and waste are simply the resources we're not harvesting because we're ignorant of their value. Yeah. We need to understand that, and we need to have an evidence-based understanding of the full value chain. It's called common reference. It's been around for a century now as a practice, and it isn't based on what has been. It is a purely evidence-based understanding of the current situation in your full value chain. And if you have common reference, you're able to engage all stakeholders. So there is a shared understanding of the current situation and what risk means, what consequence means. And you can leverage that for the next stages that you're talking about, particularly around shared vision of outcome and things like this. But critically, what that construct allows you to do, that common reference allows you to do, is to now say, well, these are the trends, this is how it affects our value chain, our operations, and you can forecast that through life of the product or through life of the process. And when you're able to cast that forward, you can then break it into risk horizons, and you can identify for each risk horizon what are the indicators of an approaching hazard, or a KRI. You can identify your performance metrics and KPIs, and you can also identify what treatments need to be in place before the next risk horizon. So what that means is you've now created intelligent risk management, leading to intelligent risk transfer. You've got stage objectives that are business objectives, but they are risk transformation. as you move towards a circular economy, you are removing or reducing your risk as you go. What does that mean? It means that you can reduce the cost of insurance as you progress. Because on the retrospective ratings, you're showing a lower cost, so a lower risk, a lower loss exposure. It also means you can forecast that future cone of equity. Now, your share price will go up or down and whatever, but you're defining the cone within which it fluctuates. And if you're de-risking it, the cone starts shifting up. Whereas if you are allowing all of these risks to accumulate and things like this, the cone starts to shift down below the horizontal. And it is all fully evidenced, it's transparent, and it can be independently validated. So there is a foundational information set to advance the whole process.
Interesting. I want to hear thoughts from, as a company, a multinational with big operations in Canada as well, that aspect of risk, but also how L'Oréal is embedding a regenerative mindset into your operations and the challenges you're still facing as you try to do that.
I was listening carefully to what you say. I think we don't look at sustainability as risk management, but as an opportunity to transform ourselves and to be more disruptive and connected with our society. And it's not to do the cute sentences. We truly think if we want to achieve the net zero to be more circular, we will do nothing alone, first point. And you was discussing about that. Today, if we are really sincere, our economy is totally linear. If there is somebody that is fully circular, can you please? Well, but us, we are still linear, but we are looking to make it more circular as possible on the full value chain. But the point is, when you share the same value, when you explain why it's important, you was talking about relationship with the community and indigenous community. When you work together, there is something virtuous that is created. So I will give you a few examples. In L'Oréal, it's really clear that it's in our core strategy, the core of our product, that sustainability is embedded. Our suppliers know it. So even though when we ask for something, when we buy something, they come with recycled plastic, less material use, and they promote inclusive or, let's say, social inclusion in the way they do the stuff they sell to us, because they know that we valorize it. So when you have the power to say sustainability, circularity, social inclusion, yes, in L'Oréal, we care for it. And for us, it's value. You engage your full ecosystem to propose you new disruptive innovation. I take a supplier from, which is another company, Carousel. They work for us and they provide some material to do our product in our factory. They know that we are really receptive to circularity. So for example, they propose new solution just for us because we are ready to pay more of how to wrap up our product and reuse eternally the same wrapping service. Even though our industrial palette, our supplier knows that we valorize to use and reuse the same palette always, because circularity is a source of value creation. So we have reached a point where our own supplier come and offer us solution. We have reached a point where our indigenous community, first point, L'Oréal Canada is on Mohawk territory. The first stuff that we have done, and I have done personally, is to meet the old Grand Chief Sky Deer and to say thank you. I am on your territory. Thank you, I'm grateful. So it starts like that with respect. Today what we are doing, we are also partner of the EDPN, which is the Educative School for First Nation, done by and for indigenous community. So we are creating a harmonious relationship with them. So we are managing the risk by building together. So for circularity, today when we talk with a big retailer as Walmart or Shopper Drug Mart, we talk about reducing the waste on the point of sales. And they listen to us because they see that we are walking the talk internally in our factory, distribution center. So our power to transform our ecosystem is disruptive. So when we share the same value, you can engage your supplier, you can engage your retailer, and you can even so engage your community around. So for me, it's never about a risk approach. It's about sharing value and recognizing the value of being more circular and more sustainable, the financial value of being more responsible. So.
Love that, sharing value up and down the value chain. So let's talk a little bit about some of the structural interventions, which we think of as policy, governance, legal frameworks. And Melissa, in your opening comments, you mentioned a little bit about what we have today for legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks not working all that well. So I guess could you unpack that a little bit more? Like, what are some of the legal mechanisms that are essential for defining values and long-term success indicators that can support kind of circular economy transformation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can think about is how do we ensure there's so many different good examples of whether it's, businesses, local governments, and even at international scale, looking at circularity, defining it, creating standards, creating action plans, implementing and then reporting back on how things are going. But we don't have a very strong integrated approach. And I think a value of, let's say at the national level in so-called Canada, having a national approach that then has embedded within it, the work of provinces, territories, regions, Indigenous governments, local communities, to have that kind of, that network is really valuable. Like we've seen even, the federal government, ECCC, mentioning the kind of inconsistent patchwork of initiatives and standards and plans. And so while it's really great that, individual businesses are taking initiatives and working on developing plans and strategies, having that holistic approach and a legal requirement to have a clear strategy, first of all, with a vision and some of these key principles to guide things, like where are we going and why? So we're not all just kind of going off and doing our own thing, and each business might have their own plan, or maybe each region has their own plan, but where are we going holistically? Having, clear objectives, metrics to guide, with obligations to create plans. And then, as a lawyer, I loved the idea of accountability. And so having that ability to report back, we're seeing that in so many contexts, whether it's related to climate is a good example. Like if we're setting a target, we can't just set a target and then just all go off and do our own thing. We have to have those mechanisms to track and then report back to see whether we're meeting the goals and objectives that we've set out. And so from my perspective, at least, I think there's a real value and a need for that within, state-based governments, and have that built out and designed inclusively, and ensuring that there is participation of Indigenous communities and nations, and obviously those that are most impacted currently by the linear economy, I think is really valuable. And having expertise to feed into that and watch and kind of see how are we doing, how are we tracking and actually achieving the objectives of what we're calling a circular economy, I think is a really valuable thing that I'd like to see implemented.
Thank you, and thanks for raising the sort of perspectives around inclusiveness and community. And Daniel, I know the work you're doing across North America touches many different communities of different sorts. And, when we think about a just and equitable circular economy, what role do you see distributive and collaborative governance models playing when we think about the governance structures we need to really drive that?
Yeah, so obviously, climate change, the environmental impacts that we're facing of a deteriorating environment, biodiversity loss does not affect everyone in the same way. It's very clear that certain communities are suffering to a greater extent. Clearly, we need to figure out how to work our action federally from the private sector, but also finding local solutions to some of these problems. in the area of climate change, thinking about what actions to take can play out very differently. We are unfortunately very trapped in a decarbonization approach to everything, right? So decarbonization is important. We need to decarbonize, but that in and of itself does not stop the problem that we have. Even if we stopped emitting CO2 emissions today completely, magic wand, they're all gone, the Earth continues to warm. And that's because what's already been emitted is in the atmosphere, and unless we can remove it, we're not going to make advancements. There are other actions that we can take. We need to focus, and here we go to the metrics and the tools that we have that the corporate sector is applying and governments as well. We are measuring our emissions incorrectly if we are trying to hit a 2030 target. And when we talk about standards and the importance of standards, none of the standards today are on a 2030 timeframe. We measure methane, for example, in a 100-year framework, where in fact, really it's more important in a 20-year framework. Same with refrigerants, HFCs, and black carbon, which are some of the pollutants that really make a difference. So we need to shift the way that we address and tackle climate change accordingly. And then when you go back to the equity equation, nature-based solutions that help us to cool before we need to use fossil fuels to cool. And that will also help those communities that live in extreme heat environments. So if you're living in a downtown area of an urban jungle with cement everywhere and it's 40 degrees outside, if you're in a building with no AC and the roof is black, you're in an oven. Yeah. And that roof is at 60, 70 degrees Celsius. So just figuring out how to bring greenery, reflective roof surfaces, reflective pavement, introduction of nature, going back to this idea that I was mentioning earlier, we need to find our way back to nature. And by doing so, we help those communities. We help those that most need the assistance by bringing nature back to them. And we all need to think about that relationship to nature because we've lost it along the way.
Interesting. Thanks for tying that back. Did you want to add to that, Maya?
I was just thinking, because I fully agree with what you say. In fact, we have to bring back nature in the middle of our business model, don't take me wrongly, but I think to give the value to nature and not to consider it as a commodity. So I think the transformation is there. We need nature to do business. I was reading that 70% of the company, for example, in Europe, depend of nature. So it's key. So I think there is a shift to be done, no deforestation, richness repartition, respect of communities, the way we are sourcing, but changing even though the core of what we do, putting the nature at the middle, respecting the planet boundary. Water, we can talk about water too. Water will be under stress in very few years. We don't feel it in Canada because we are full of water, but there is already a lot of parts in the world where there is no water. So I think the way we think business, we have to be very more global, very more holistic and inclusive, and looking at what we use and what is the consequences we do on nature. So I was just thinking about that when you talk about that.
We know in the indigenous conceptualization of ecosystems and nature, we as humans are just one part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it's us humans that look at natural resources as a service to us and that they're for us to use. And that's the problem. We don't see ourselves as part of that ecosystem. And we need to go back to understanding that relationship that we all use it. And we all talk about indigenous communities being the more respectful of nature, but 300-400 years ago, all of humanity had a closer relationship with nature. Absolutely. It's through the industrialization process and the models and paradigms that we've built that we've lost that relationship. And we need to go back to that.
If I could pick up on that, I think one of the key things is that we are all interconnected, right? And that everything that we put out there and put out to the natural world comes back to us. And you were saying about the little bit of garbage that you put out there. And I think when we think about circularity, it comes back to me about the safety and the health too, is whatever we're putting out there, it doesn't just go away. It will come back to us. And so when we talk about things like plastics, and we know there's a lot of inherently toxic and harmful elements to plastics, and we talk about trying to make this perfect circularity, we really have to think about the fact that we're seeing in microplastics, we're seeing where it is in our bodies. When we're doing circularity, are we thinking about the fact that nothing ever really can go away? It breaks down, and maybe we have some great engineers out there and some great tech fixes, but what is actually coming back and being reabsorbed by us, by the soil, by the air, by the water? There are no magical tech solutions to all of that. Everything, we are in one ecosystem together. You said about the economy, eco at our home, we are all in it together. And if we're not thinking about that intimate interconnection consistently and constantly, we're going to continue to see the degradation of our health and the health of the natural world.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
On the other side, I really love your concept because it's where we have to go and where we should think. But on the other side, we have to start from somewhere. And there is a lot of company that didn't have started this transformation. And I think on this point, sometimes we have to make it also a little bit simple also. There is a lot of PME, and everything. And there, I would like to say, use what is already existing. For example, in Quebec, we have Rethink Quebec, certification like Ici on recycle. I just want to say, okay, we have to target the radical transformation, but if you don't know how to do it, please start with your incremental addition. If we are all certified Ici on recycle in Quebec, it will be a big advancement for everybody there. So I just want sometimes that we stay grounded to concrete action because there is a lot of complexity with this interconnection. And for big company, it's easier for us to integrate it because we can create job and expert on forest, on water and everything. But also for the smaller company or the smaller actor, I will say do not give up to ask the external expert and to do small change. Because what is the worst situation for me, it's not changing. Just that.
Thank you. That reminds me of the comment that Luc Rabouin from the Ville de Montréal mentioned yesterday about implementation being divine. So how do we take that action at all ground levels? I'm going to go to questions from the audience because this is such a big topic and we only have an hour to unpack it a little bit. I'll probably only get to the top two, but if you want to put some in swap card and vote them up, I'll try and get to at least our top two. And so I'm thinking also, though, about the very important role that investment and finance play in this. And Alec, you've already unpacked sort of the risk side. You know, we don't get the ROI or the investment coming if there's too high a risk. But on the investment side, how can we be thinking about investment strategies that we need to support sort of this economy that serves people rather than the people serving the economy? How do we flip that a little bit?
No, it's a fascinating question, and I would say it's difficult. Most investment decisions are actually based on the performance of the management team, their track record. It's not based on the current evidence profile. And the main reason for that is that we have a familiar investment model, and we've been able to assume most things, of which the reflection is the track record of that management team. And so that's why we use that metric. Now, why do we have that model? Well, at the end of the Second World War, the economy served the people. It was about rebuilding the world. It was about getting everything back on its feet. And that served us well for about 40 years. But behind the scenes, the world was changing.
Right.
And so the underlying assumptions of that model ceased to be effective. They ceased to be relevant, to the point where the investment model became disjointed to the world we live in. And as a result, more and more people became disenfranchised. And the situation we're in now, we can already see large portions of the population who do not feel that they are part of the economy anymore. They no longer have a voice. They're finding affordability difficult and so on and so forth. So the economy has separated from society. And we have the necessary tools, but it means that the overall model, the overall construct of how we look at investment, it needs a reset. All of the instruments are there. Every instrument we need is there. We don't need to invent something new. It's a reset on the model that defines the relationship between economy and people. That's all. If we can do that, we'll be back on track.
I love that. I think the idea that we don't have to totally restart from scratch, but that we can work with some of our financial systems or mechanisms if we reset those in a way that works for our future. I think.
Well, if I could just add to that, it's also what are we investing in? And I know we're talking more transformative, so I'll go there. But if our metrics for investment weren't just on how much profit we're getting, how much growth we're having, but when I talk about well-being, it's metrics like human health, clean water, access to jobs that are good for you and your community. There are a host of things that we as a society do care about, but the economy isn't orientated towards investing in that, and we need to get shareholder profits. That's just the way it's designed. And I think the average person wants that broader consideration in there. They want to do what's best for the earth and for their communities. And so I think when I talk about broadening our beyond profits to well-being objectives and metrics, it's breaking down those things that we really care about and value and building that into our economy, how we judge success, what we want to invest in people and planet, and long-term health and longevity for all.
That is precisely the reset we're talking about. If you think about the end of the Second World War, that is exactly what everything you've just described is exactly what drove the design of the economy. Look at everything that was introduced, from pensions to healthcare to education and everything else. It was all introduced because of that. It was the rebuild of society, community, the ability for families, the new housing initiatives, all of this stuff came down to the creation of an investment model. And it served us well as long as the circumstances stayed consistent. But the circumstances have changed.
I was thinking about your reset. I really love the. For me, it's all about what you consider to be value. Yes. And value is not just about money. Yes. It's about people and nature respect. And so it's not about profit, it's about value, and it's far away bigger, it's what you say, than just about money. And what we have done concretely, for example, in our company, all the fund or money that is invested by L'Oréal Canada, we have excluded, for example, all the coal industry, cigarette, alcohol, stuff like that. And we have included some assets that were more inclusive, more circular, that were doing even better than us. Finding the right intersection that is good for money, not too bad rentability, but great in terms of ESG rating and great for people. It took courage, but it's truly virtuous in terms of culture. And also about money and finance, we have created different funds also to invest for nature regeneration, because you talk about something. Even though if we do our energetical transition, it's not enough. We need to regenerate forest, nature. It's not just about business model. We have to, the private sector have to regenerate nature. We have to handle this responsibility, but we have also to support university to have more innovation to support us to be more circular. So us, as a private sector, we have to have different funds for circularity, for nature regeneration, and for vulnerable community. I will not say that we are perfect, but we have at least this kind of fund. It should be bigger. It's never enough, but we should invest more.
I mean, you can boil that down simply by saying, what is the world we want our children to inherit?
This is it. And what is the true value?
Precisely.
And I've been
matter.
impressed about L'Oréal's investment in the Circular Innovation Fund. I know we have some of the Cycle Capital people here as well, so thank you. Let's take at least a question here, and if it's really meaty, we might not get to two, but maybe we can keep our answers really succinct, and maybe one or two people can take one question. We'll go to the next one as quickly as we can. Joe?
Hi, Tracy Renaud from the Design Loop. I wanted to throw out an idea to everybody on the panel. Very quickly, I'm an economist, and we're in a market economy globally, pretty much. And what lever do we have? Pricing is the lever. So really, to really simplify everything here, we have to take nature from being an externality in our model and price it in and internalize it, right? So that only the way we can do that is through governments, right? Because we, as private industry, can't, we won't all agree on this globally. So I want to know how you feel about that and what you're ready to accept. I know it's very polarizing politically to say these things, but I think it's the simplest way in our market economy that we can actually recognize the value of nature.
Daniel?
You hit the nail on the head. And when I started my career, I was at the World Bank. And back then, this was the 90s, China had done a whole exercise on green GDP to calculate in the midst of their growth what was the cost to nature. And we never saw that study because once they got the conclusions, they decided not to publish it. But the reality is we need to incorporate nature in all of our assessments of how we want to live. And to the extent that we continue to focus on growth and this next quarter and the stock market and to figure out, are we growing our bank account? And is that all that is growing? And the more we concentrate wealth in single corporations or even in single people, the more we are off the path. That is the heart of the problem. And we really need to break that. And when we talk about transformation, this is what we're talking about. We need to change the way we value why we do the things that we do. And we need to incorporate all of the elements of our ecosystem, of our home, of our oikos into our models.
Thank you, Daniel.
I know we're out of time, but just to add, I commend the effort to ensure that we're considering nature in everything that we do, and we do live in a market-based system, and an interim step, I understand the value in that, but there's also the dangers of just monetizing and commodifying everything. And, water, air, regenerative soil, there is no price you can put on that. And so I would just be hesitant to say that that is the be-all, end-all solution. It may be as a stopgap measure that can help us along the way to more transformation. But we just have to be cautious about making everything market-based and commodifying everything when some things really are just priceless.
We went
Reading the Lorax.
the Lorax.
Oh, I didn't even mean to do that, sorry.
We started about 5 minutes late, so I'm happy to go about 5 minutes over and take another question from Swap Card if you have one.
Yeah, happy to help out with that. Dotted line to this similar question. Circularity is set to fail if we still aim at only economic growth. How can we reach our social and environmental goals if we keep selling green or sustainable growth?
We're touching on that growth topic a bit just now. So anybody want to talk about the idea of green growth or circular growth? Can we have that?
We have a unit at the CEC called Green Growth, and we're changing the name because we need to get away from the concept of growth as our end-all objective. We have to think differently about what is important to us.
Any other last thoughts?
I am not naive, but I am quite optimistic. I do this job during more than 15 years, and I have done it in Brazil and Canada. First, when I saw all the maturity of my company have gained and expertise and going deeper, it gave me hope. And I think and when I saw at the ecosystem around me in Canada, startup, university, the youth a positive movement of creating true value for everybody. If you look at the youth people, I have a lot in my team and especially in my committee. Believe me, if I don't do what I claim to do, they quit tomorrow. But they will stay and continue to work and to drive change in the company just if we are authentic and sincere, and they are the leader of tomorrow. So I think the youth, it's a good new way to reset growth, because they don't want a job where you win a lot of money. They want a job that is full of purpose. So I am very optimistic on it. I just think we should organize more and build biggest coalition and movement for this positive growth. You can call it green. I hate the word green, but let's call it positive growth. And there I think we should organize more together. And bonify the one who do the effort to improve, not to be perfect, to improve.
So our unit is not going to be called Green Growth, it's going to be called Sustainable Lifestyles. And it's just about our way of living as opposed to growing green.
I love a lifestyle, but I will say share positive impact.
You might have hit a bit of a button there. I think we might have to bring this as a topic back for our next event, or at least maybe sooner, a conversation around this for sure. I'm conscious of time, and I just want to give everybody from the group here 30 seconds to sort of wrap up with a final thought in terms of what is one action we must take tomorrow to advance transformation. And Melissa, maybe we can start with you, and if you want to just add a little bit to Maya's last comment, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe because that last question is exactly the point I feel very passionately about, is that it's always the elephant in the room when I'm in these circles, in the circular economy circles, but that the issue of growth, and that relates to consumption, right? There's just such a push to continue to consume bigger, better, more, and the inequity in that is growing. What do we just have, the SpaceX or whatever just went up, the billionaires going up to look at space for 8 minutes. That kind of wealth and overconsumption is something that we need to deal with, and that growth is something that we need to manage. And I don't think that we can have us living within the limits of what the earth can provide and continue to grow. We're just going to continue to grow the circle in an inequitable fashion. And so, I would just really say we need to revisit that as a society and think about other ways that we can measure success and thrive.
So 10 seconds, one action that we must take tomorrow.
Consumption. We can have C&D waste and redesign, but when I see houses being knocked down that are perfectly good for 4 people and building a new monstrosity to replace it, it's great that you took all those parts and reused them, but why are we consuming so much?
Right.
So you mentioned the lifestyle, let's go back to a smaller footprint, everybody.
There's some cool people in this room doing home relocation, so talk to those people for sure. Who wants to just give a 20-second final?
Sure. The paradigm is broken. We need to recognize that the system we have does not work, and we need to change it. And I will repeat what I said earlier. The pathway is finding our way back to nature. That everyone needs to do that. You need to, where do your berries come from? Where does your avocado come from? Where does your food come from? Do you know? We used to know. We used to know exactly where it came from, and we no longer do. And finding our way back to nature is finding that link and understanding how nature influences us and how we live with nature. We have lost that pathway, and we need to get back.
Thank you.
I would say measuring. Start measuring your footprint, individual and as a company. Positive and negative. You will be scared. Act. Don't stay scared. Act. Work on it. And engage, because if you need to transform, you need the support of your ecosystem.
Thank you.
And I'd like to see common reference established by companies, get their stakeholders together and identify a shared vision of outcome, so that not everyone has to be doing the same thing. It doesn't have to be, everyone sort of playing tiddlywinks together. It's about moving towards the same eventual outcome. And if we can do that, we stop fussing about today, we start thinking about tomorrow and the transformation we need to take.
So no more tiddlywinks, people. Get to work. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to all of you for staying a few extra minutes, and really appreciate the topic.